Welcome back. Now let's talk about the hate speech bill. Discussions are still ongoing over the controversial bill since it was reintroduced on the floor of the Senate by the Deputy Chief Whip, Senator Sabi Abdullahi. Although the Senate has tried to distance itself from the bill, Senator Abdullahi, who sponsored it, says he remains undeterred and will continue to push for the legislation to scale through. The newly introduced National Commission for the Prohibition of Hate Speech bill prescribes the death penalty for anyone found guilty of spreading falsehood now that leads to the death of another person. It also seeks the establishment of a National Commission for the Prohibition of Hate Speech to help investigate and prosecute offenders. All right, let's discuss more about this bill that is generating a lot of controversy across the country. I'm now being joined on the program from Abuja by the man who initiated, who is actually the mover of that bill now in the Senate. I'm talking about Senator Sabi Abdullahi, who is, of course, the Deputy Chief Whip of the Senate, and he represents Niger North Senatorial District in the Senate. Senator, thank you very much for joining us on the program. Are you surprised that your bill is generating this much controversy?
Yeah, thank you, DEJI, for having me. Well, let me say very clearly that I'm not surprised, but at the same time, I'm gladdened by the fact that Nigerians are discussing and Nigerians are talking. In the first instance, I understand the emotions and the sentiments, and I have come to the conclusion, very rightly so, that Nigerians do not want anything to do with death. And so the bill has generated controversy perhaps because of the punishment of death by hanging for those who engineered violence due to hate speech leading to death of other people. But at the same time, I think we are in a democracy, and where people hear their view, we as leaders and representatives of the people are bound to listen to such concern.
Absolutely.
And so for the concern of the death penalty, I've already issued a press statement 2 days ago to the effect that I personally will ensure that the death penalty is dropped from the provisions of the bill so that we can work together with other stakeholders, my colleagues inclusive, to come up with other punishment that will deter people, because the essence of law is actually to deter people from committing such kind of offense. But perhaps taking away, our attention from, the so much controversy that has been put on the death penalty, given the fact that I, as the sponsor of the bill, have made it very clear that the death penalty is going to be dropped. Let's look at the merit of the bill. The truth of the matter is, Nigeria has witnessed so much violence, and most of the violence over the past 10, 20 years have been studied by many people. And the conclusion from these studies clearly shows that before this violence takes place, it is always preceded by hate speeches, by people who discriminate or hate some other people because of the fact that they belong to one tribe or ethnic group rather than their own, and or the religion. Because the two fault lines in Nigeria today are ethnicity and religion. Most of our violence over the past years have been on the grounds of either ethnicity or religious intolerance. But the truth of the matter also is, this violence have led to death. I've seen a statistics that says over the past years, there has been over 1,500 plus deaths due to 100 incidences of violence, which in all of this, it is either there is a religious undertone to it or there is an ethnic undertone to it. So my concern here is that these people who have lost their lives, do they not matter? And I think I'm saying it in a very loud voice that their lives also matter. We don't have to fold our arms as leaders, pretending that hate speech is not a problem, pretending that people are not victims of the violence attributable to hate speeches. I think this is the mistake we'll be making if we ignore this.
I mean, you're quite right. Sorry to interrupt now. You're quite right. Hate speech is a big problem. But the issue some people have with your bill is that, look, who defines what hate speech is? How is it defined? It talks about setting up a commission and all of that. But how does one define what hate speech is? If I make, say I give a speech, for instance, How do you determine that the speech is actually hate speech?
All right. The point to be made here is that we know the definition of hate is something having to do with extreme anger, extreme hatred, taking it from the noun to the adjective, which qualifies the word hate. And I think this is the extreme form of people's emotion going to the extreme of showing that I don't like you because you are this. And I think the various definitions I have seen, for example, there is a definition from the UN Committee on racial discrimination. There is also a definition from the European Council of Ministers. In all of this, what is important is that there is hatred attached to it, and that hatred has been so expressed as to incite other people to violence just simply because the person belongs to an ethnic group you do not like, or simply because the person belongs to a religion you don't like. In Nigeria, I'm sticking to these two fault lines because that is what studies have confirmed to be the fault lines.
Because we don't deal with you have a situation where an individual makes a speech and then he says, well, he doesn't see it as hate speech, and somebody sees the speech differently. People could see a speech from different perspectives. So what would qualify for hate speech for you may not qualify as hate speech now for others. So that's where the problem is.
No, the issue is that at the end of the day, based on all of these discussions we are having, we are going to firm up the definition of hate speech because there are bills from other countries that have actually defined hate speech. But you see, this is Nigeria, and so we must define it within the context of what is our own reality. But what I want to say in all of the definitions is that there must be incitement publicly to violence on the basis of discrimination against either somebody's ethnicity or somebody's religion.
And what do you make of the argument of some people who say, look, all these things have been taken care of by the Constitution, that there are provisions of the Constitution, that specifically, deal with all of these issues?
Yes, I've had that argument, and I'm not wishing it away. But the point I just want to make is that the penal code in the north, the criminal code in the south, if they were as effective, we wouldn't have been talking about hate speech. And I want to submit that society is dynamic. The time and period and even the manner of life of people when these laws were put in place, Nigeria has moved. The world has moved. The entire world itself is witnessing increased hate speech more than it has ever seen before. And that is why at the last count, in the last 10 years, more than 5 countries have come up with laws dealing with hate speech, trying to curb it. And I think in our own case, like I've said, the number of violence that has been recorded, studies that have been carried out to show this violence, usually preceded by hate speeches, is significant enough for us to take action.
But doesn't it bother you that a commission has to be set up for this? An independent body now has to be set up. The commission will have a director, so to speak, have offices and all of that. In this age and time when we're talking about cutting down on the cost of governance, would that make sense?
Yeah, it makes sense, because where there is violence and society is brought down, will you even be talking about cost of governance? You'll be talking about life. And this is talking about life. Now, let me take the other dimension of this. Even where there is no violence, studies have shown and records have shown that there are people who are so pained by hate speeches against them, even at individual level, that they fall into depression and even become suicidal. And I think a very classical case in point, which people should go and take a look at, is the student in ABU, a girl who took her life. Unknown to many people that she's been suffering from hatred. She felt hated, and this is even between her and her parents.
The question then is, why isn't the police able to deal with this? Why do we have to set up a separate body to handle it? This is something that you would expect that, the police, for instance, should be able to deal with. Our courts should be able to deal with, rather than set up an independent body and designate it as a hate speech commission and, saddle it with that responsibility of, going after people who make, seemingly hate speeches.
All right. The point to be made here is that the police have always been there. How come these crises have refused to abate? That tells you that something is wrong with the...
So maybe the problem is with enforcement and implementation, because you could also end up with the same problem.
It might be a part, but the point I want to make here is that there is need for people to be engaged. There is need for people to be brought together to discuss. And there are people who willingly are not willing to even discuss among themselves. But if they have an arbiter that they can trust, an arbiter that means well for them, I'm sure they will agree to dialogue. And like I want to point out here, Kenya had similar problem, and they have a body, and that body has now helped them to begin to bring warring, parties, people who believe before they hate each other on the basis of one, divide or the other. And today that commission is doing a wonderful job for that country. There are many other countries that are having similar situations. And what is important is for us not to leave this issue unattended to. And I think the danger it does is that it builds up. And the moment it builds up and have a life of its own, that is when you see genocide. Are we saying that we want to fold our arms until there is genocide before we bring a law? The Rwanda case is a classical example. And if you check, the ethnic division in Rwanda is not as deep as in Nigeria. And like I have said, what is the trend of violence? Has it abated? It has not abated. In fact, it is even becoming worse. And I will tell you very clearly that I have seen cases where people really become helpless because they don't even know where to turn to. And so, yes, these laws are there, but has it solved the problem? Has it been able to?
Yeah, but that's the problem with most of our laws. I would argue with you to say, look, we have very beautiful laws in this country. We have laws to take care of basically every problem that crops up. Our only problem is that we do not implement the laws, and the solution to some of these problems would not be to make new laws, but, use those laws you have and just implement them. Use the laws you have to deal with the problem. So you don't solve the problem by making new laws that you know may not be implemented.
Let's get this fact. DEJI, let's get this fact. This has always been the argument anytime a new idea comes in to tackle a new problem. The existing situation is always being said to be enough and sufficient. It has never been and can never be. The truth of the matter is that the object and the focus of this particular commission is not to go even after those who have already finished committing it, is to monitor and receive complaints from people who have started developing, because societal problems are incremental. They don't just happen one day. They keep building up. And the classical case of Rwanda, like I said, is there. It did not happen just one night. It started building up gradually. But there was nobody to monitor the nuances and to see the red lines. And so this commission will be saddled with that responsibility. As we speak today, there are some communities in this country that are at war among themselves. They hate each other so deeply. And anything between the two of them, one person just raises the alarm and the other people become mob.
Sorry, and I want to tell you that. Could we say?
Yeah, let me finish this thought. Okay. I will tell you very clearly that there are mob out there. There are mob out there. They don't mind if Nigeria disintegrates today. Do we have to allow them? My answer is no. Nigeria is a beautiful country. Nigeria is made up of very wonderful people. And I think we need to begin to make ourselves to appreciate this. But right now, as we speak, not much effort within this context is being done. And that is why some people still believe they just have to take the laws into their hands just because they hate somebody. There's also this aspect of victimization. There are many people who, on the basis of even working, where they work, there are people who are being victimized simply because they don't belong to maybe the same religion or even the same tribe as the person who is supposed to take care of their welfare. So what do we do with all of these things? We can't leave people to become helpless on this ground.
Absolutely, I understand you. I'm just wondering, don't you think maybe a different approach would be, look, even if at all you're going to have that commission, that this whole bill and this whole idea of the hate speech thing should be aimed at, not aimed at being punitive, so to speak, but aimed at reconciliation and education, that way you can get people to embrace it. But when you begin to emphasize the punitive part of it, then...
Well, I agree with you, DEJI, and I think the bill copiously dealt with preventive measures, conciliatory measures, but that provision of the capital punishment is what people just put forward without actually looking at the other components of the bill. And that is why I said I understand the sentiment, and of course this is a democracy, and so for me, clearly, I have said, well, the death sentence is off. I, as a sponsor, I'm saying it very loud and clear that the death sentence is off.
I'm very quickly, I have to ask you this before I let you go, very quickly. This bill is not just about hate speech alone. So could you just throw some more light on it? Because it appears everybody keeps talking about hate speech, but the bill is definitely not just about hate speech.
Yes, it's also talking about victimization. And as I speak to you, I know, I was in public service, I know people who have suffered victimization outrightly to the extent that they want to even exit the organization on the grounds of the fact that either religion or ethnicity. And this is rife. And I know Nigerians out there, people who are affected, understand what I'm talking about. Now, that aspect is also there. And at the same time, beyond all of this, the commission is actually given a responsibility to see how to bring conciliation among communities or among different divides of people based on what they are supposed to be doing as a commission, such that they can bring in these people when they receive complaints or when they monitor and see what is happening or when there is a referral to them, so that at the end of the day, they can step in and do an independent investigation. And if they found that this thing is even frivolous, they can bring all the parties and show them the fact that, oh, this is not what you are thinking. This is what this person is thinking. So the point I'm making is that it is not too much for us to provide such kind of platforms. It's not too much for us to provide this kind of body where Nigerians will have the opportunity to bring their complaints so that people can attend to these issues. At least we can nip in the bud the potential flash crisis that we have seen over the years. We know the flashpoints, we know what happens, and they keep repeating themselves. How come these same crises keep repeating themselves in the same location, in the same place, over the same reason? This has been the story of violent clashes in Nigeria. And I think, based on the studies, you see, the beauty about people studying a problem is that they are able to go into it and to understand how it comes about and whether it is true or not. And so for me, I believe what I'm talking about is empirical. There are a number of studies to justify this, and I have seen so many countries really taking this matter very seriously because the life of their citizens matter. The same vein that people talk about rights. If you don't have life, if you are not alive, can you talk about any right? You can't be talking about any right.
All right, Senator Sabi, thank you very much for joining us on the program, and thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much for having me.
All right. Well, that was Senator Aliyu Sabi Abdullahi, who is, of course, the Deputy Chief Whip of the Senate and the sponsor of the hate speech bill. Well, that's it on the program, but if you want to watch it again, it's simple. Just go to our website, tv360nigeria.com. You'll find this program and lots more there. You can also follow the conversation on our various social media platforms. Thank you very much for watching. I'll see you again next week. Bye-bye.